Edition of Better Than Wolves with Karnak Sam. Alright, see if the microphone's working first. Edition of Better Than Wolves with Karnak Sam. Alright, see if the microphone's. I would like to tell you guys a little bit about what's been going on here for the past 10-15 minutes or so. I started to, actually it's been going on for like an hour. Really frustrated. I'd rather not talk about it, but I have to. So anyway, in the last couple of hours, I have really wanted to be playing, but oh, come on, seriously? Ah, I didn't have the ability to play because I couldn't get XSplit to work. Well, I was uploading videos to YouTube, and I realized that the videos that I had were very low quality. Very low quality. Like, too low of a quality. Like, not acceptable quality. So, I decided to look into alternatives to XSplit. And because, I mean, it's god-awful expensive for XSplit. Too expensive to really be usable for the masses. I mean, who has $150 to buy a license for XSplit? It's ridiculous. I decided to look into, oh, look at that, my first piece of hemp. Uh, um, I decided to look into free alternatives for XSplit and came up with a couple looked like really good options. One of them was an open source uh, splitter streamer that it was just beyond me. I couldn't quite figure out how to use it, so that's fine. Looked like it was a good product, but it was a little bit overqualified for what I need. And the other one was what I thought was going to be a really good program called Evolve. And Evolve may have worked out, but I had problems with my microphone as well after the fact. I didn't realize that I was having trouble with my microphone, so um, I had some technological fumblings that I had to work through. And now that all of that's over with, I'm going to have to um, just record for today because I do actually want to play the game at some point today. I'm just going to have to deal with it for today. And tomorrow, when I come home from work, I'm going to look at trying to download a program that will work. Um, the Evolve program seemed to be making Minecraft crash quite a bit, but I can deal with that if I can figure out the right way to open it up. But, I mean, things could be worse. But anyway, the fact that the videos are such low quality really upsets me because I've made a lot of progress in this game. So what I might end up having to do, since I really don't have many viewers, if any, um, I might end up restarting. I don't know, maybe one more restart. And if I do that, it'll be the final restart. And yeah, so that's where I am now. I don't want to do that though. I really don't want to restart. We finally got, animals, and we've got the ability to, you know, I mean, we're really making progress here. So, uh, yeah. So anyway, I'm muting my microphone because I don't feel like talking today. So, piss off. I love you. Bye.
Makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website, portfolio, and online store. For a free trial and 10% off, visit squarespace.com/history and enter offer code HISTORY at checkout. A better web starts with your website.
Welcome to Stuff You Missed in History Class from HowStuffWorks.com.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Tracy V. Wilson.
And I'm Holly Fry.
So, late this winter,
Yes?
I got to go to the Cayman Islands National Museum in Georgetown, Grand Cayman, where I'd actually been once before.
Because you're a fancy vacationer.
I'm a fancy vacationer, but this time we were trying to vacation both fancily and frugally.
Yeah.
Which is why we spent our time in Grand Cayman walking around and going to the National Museum, which is not a very expensive place to go if you are in Grand Cayman. So I had been there once before, but this time I took Patrick with me. The museum is in the oldest public building in the Cayman Islands. It's one of the very few 19th century structures still standing on the islands because they are struck by hurricanes on a regular basis. While we were there, Patrick mashed a button on one of the displays and it brought up this video on something called the Wreck of the Ten Sail. And we started off being like, that's a weird name for a ship, which is why we watched it. And then as we watched this video, we realized that the Ten Sail was not the name of the ship. It was 10 sail of ships. So 10 ships. A shipwreck of 10 ships at once. It was the biggest shipping disaster in Cayman Islands history. And so naturally, Patrick said, you should do a podcast on this. So we are.
Yay!
Thanks to my vacation. So
I love a good vacation discovery.
I do too. I
really
have
do.
them pretty often when I am on vacation. And this, I like the last time I had been in the museum, there was nothing like that really sparked my attention this way. But this one did.
Yay! So just so you have some background on the Cayman Islands. These are a collection of islands in the Caribbean, south of Cuba and northwest of Haiti, and they were uninhabited by humans when Columbus sighted them in 1503 after he was blown off course on his last voyage to the Americas. There is no archaeological evidence of any indigenous people living on these islands, but there certainly were lots and lots of turtles, so Columbus named them Las Tortugas.
Later, they were renamed the Caymanas, probably after the Carib word for caiman, the alligator-like lizard that lives in Central and South America. And this eventually morphed into being the Cayman Islands. They are made up of Grand Cayman, Little Cayman, and Cayman Brac. The Cayman Islands are now famous for their banking and financial industries and being a place to squirrel your money offshore to get it away from the tax man. But until more modern times, the economy was based on more local industries like rope making.
And during the golden age of piracy, they were also a popular haven for pirates, including Blackbeard. This is what led Prince Philip to say, on a 1994 visit to dedicate a monument to this disaster, "Aren't most of you descended from pirates?"
It cracks me up.
I love Prince Philip.
So the ocean around the Cayman Islands is just full of shipwrecks. Unlike the larger Caribbean islands like Haiti, Cuba, or Jamaica, the Caymans are really flat and low to the ocean, so even in good weather, they can be hard to see from far away. And they're also surrounded by really treacherous reefs and right in the middle of a track for major hurricanes.
And yet, in spite of all this danger and kind of a non-ideal topographical situation, during this part of history, ships traveling back and forth between the Caribbean and Europe routinely went around the Caymans rather than taking the much more direct route between Cuba and Hispaniola. That bit of water, which is known as the Windward Passage, is extremely rough and very windy.
I have been through the Windward Passage 4 times. It has made me seasick every time. And that was in like a great big ship with modern stabilizing technology. So I cannot really imagine how horrible it must have been to go through that little stretch between Cuba and Hispaniola in like a wooden sailing ship from the 18th century. That sounds terrible.
Yeah, probably a little bit of a tummy twister.
Yeah. So instead of going through the Windward Passage, they would go the long way around the Cayman Islands, which could be treacherous, but okay if you gave it a wide berth. And then once you got on the other side, the Gulf Stream would speed the ship along its way. So it was a farther journey, but easier than going through the Windward Passage. It did not go so well one night in 1794, though.
And the story of this particular shipwreck starts with the French Revolutionary Wars, during which France was at war with a whole chunk of Europe, including Great Britain. And along with everything else going on, the warring nations' navies were naturally taking one another's ships as prizes and trying to protect their own shipping interests by providing naval escorts for civilian vessels.
In 1793, the British Royal Navy took the French frigate Inconstant as a prize, and after taking it to Port Royal, Jamaica, the Navy gave it a new crew and put it back into service as the Convert, since there was already a ship named Inconstant in the Royal Navy.
And the Convert was really too lightly built to survive heavy combat, so, under Captain John Lawford, it was put into service as a scout, a messenger, and also as an escort for merchant convoys.
In January of 1794, the Convert was sent to the west end of Jamaica to gather up a convoy and escort it back to England. This convoy was originally scheduled to leave at the end of January, but it was postponed a couple of times. First by a request of the Chief of Magistrates and Merchants, who thought that a later departure date would be better for the merchant community as a whole. Then it was delayed a little bit longer because the winds were very light when they were trying to set sail, and it was not enough to get the heaviest merchant ships out of the bay.
And when the convoy finally set sail on February 6th, it had 58 ships, and all but 3 of them were bound for Europe. And those 3 were going to various American ports. This sounds like a huge, huge convoy, but this size really wasn't unusual for a convoy at this point in history, especially during wartime.
Yeah.
Kind of like a stick-together mindset.
Yeah, if you wanted to wait for a military escort, you pretty much had to go when that was going to be available to you. Lawford's orders were to set the pace to that of the slowest ship and then to keep the convoy together at all costs. And he did this by ordering all of the merchant ships to stay behind the Convert, which would occasionally fire its guns to warn merchants that started to creep ahead of it.
And under normal circumstances, a ship of this era leaving Jamaica would pass the Caymans within 24 hours. And theoretically, that should have been possible even with such a large convoy. But one of the merchant vessels was leaky, and the convoy had to lie to twice while it was bailed out. And even though they picked up speed to try to make better time, when the sun went down on the 7th, they had seen no sight of land.
This was a very dark, cloudy night. And as midnight approached, the sailing master, who was named Thomas Popplewell, calculated that they should be safely past the Caymans with at least 7 leagues between the convoy and the treacherous reefs. Popplewell also suggested that they needed to alter their direction a little bit to compensate for very northerly winds so that they would stay on their course, which was sort of aimed at the western tip of Cuba.
And based on Popplewell's recommendations, Lawford gave the order. Popplewell relieved him for the night, and he went below.
At about 3 a.m., 2 shots were fired from one of the civilian ships. Popplewell went below. He woke Lawford up. They went back up. Both of them thought that this was a distress call from one of the ships behind them. But when Lawford got on deck again, he realized that several ships had passed the Convert in the night, apparently without anyone aboard the Convert realizing. The shot had come from one of the ships that was ahead of them, not a ship behind them.
And at the same time, someone on watch called that there were breakers ahead. In Lawton's words, they, quote, appeared in every direction, and I could not tell from the darkness of the night to what extent they might run.
So, knowing that the breakers meant they were all in imminent danger, the Convert tried to take evasive action. This was a really nimble ship. It was a light and fast French ship, and according to the captain, they really would have been fine. But almost immediately, Lawford realized that they were on an inevitable collision course with one of the merchant ships that was also right next to them. The 2 ships struck each other, and their crews managed to separate them, but only for the Convert to then be struck again by the other ship.
And about this same time, Popplewell tried to sound the depth of the water, but as he did, the Convert ground against the reef.
The crew tried to lighten the frigate by taking down the masts, but the damage was already done. The bilge was filling up, and the captain had to... What happened next? It's exciting. Middle of the night shipwreck. Let's take a moment.
Exciting.
Yeah, let's take a moment and talk about a sponsor.
Okay. So, your mission, theoretically, should always be to take good care of yourself, eat smartly, and, be the best you can be. And sometimes that can be a little bit tricky. We all talk about how we're going to plan to eat right, but it doesn't always come to fruition. However, NatureBox can totally help you in this mission. They'll send great tasting snacks right to your door, and they're really good for you. They're healthy and yummy. I'm a runner, and I really like taking the mango orange fruit chews with me on a run.
Oh yeah, having
Most runners like to carry something if they're doing like distance that will give them a little kind of kick of energy partway
Yeah.
through, and it's easy to digest.
I pretty much always need something between the end of work and going to the gym, and it should not be an entire meal. That's a bad idea. So having, little bags of snacks from my NatureBox shipment,
Yeah.
extremely convenient way to have something, on the way there before
Yeah.
I leave the office.
And then after the run is over, it's time for peanut butter nom noms. 'Cause sometimes for some people, if you have things that have grains in them, they're a little difficult to digest while you're running. But afterwards, it's a great way to replenish. Perfect. And I've been eyeing, but have not tried yet, the cocoa waffle wafers, but they look really delicious.
Yes, I've been snacking on the baked peppery potato fries
Oh,
because
they're so good.
anything with potato makes me very happy.
And you won't have to worry about trans fats. You're not going to find any high fructose corn syrup in any of their products. And they have free shipping anywhere in the U.S. So NatureBox is really a great alternative to, kind of those moments when you fail your resolution and you end up grabbing something quickly on the go that's maybe not great for you. And you can try NatureBox right now and you will get 50% off your first box by going to naturebox.com/history. That's naturebox.com/history. So stay full and strong and go to naturebox.com.
So it was clear even in the middle of the night that multiple ships had wrecked, and they started evacuating, either with their own boats or with canoes that were rowed out from the island. So survivors who were in the water made rafts out of flotsam and jetsam to try to get to shore. But the going was really rough. It was the middle of the night, the sea was extremely choppy, and the wind was blowing right at the reef. So the ships that had avoided this pileup could not risk approaching to assist.
And sailors from the convert who managed to make it into the ship's boats were picked up by other vessels. About 20 of the convert's crew decided to wait aboard the disabled ship for rescue rather than risk the canoe passage to land at night in the dark.
Yeah, I can kind of imagine them being like, yeah, that is not happening. The men who made it to shore made huts and tents from the wreckage and then used the converts' boats to try to salvage provisions and other equipment. But there was really not a lot they could do in the middle of the night. The sharp coral was destroying their ropes as they were trying to haul things, and the sea was so rough that even really strong swimmers were having trouble managing it.
When the sun came up, they saw, in Lawford's words, quote, "a most melancholy scene. 7 ships and 2 brigs on the same reef with the convert, a very heavy sea running, and the wind blowing directly on the shore. Those 7 ships and 2 brigs were the William and Elizabeth, the Moorhall, the Ludlow, the Britannia, the Richard, the Nancy, the Eagle, the Sally, and the Fortune."
The Ludlow was sadly a fine new vessel on her first voyage, according to an advertisement that had been placed in Kingston, Jamaica the December before, advertising its place in the convoy. And the Moorhall, so sadly, was full of, quote, flour, ham, cheese, and potatoes for sale, although most of the perishables were lost after the wreck.
I feel like we should have a moment of silence
For all the
ham and cheese.
all the ham and cheese, well, and the potatoes.
Yeah.
It was all lost.
There was a lot of casserole that was lost at sea. Mm-hmm. Not to belittle the loss of the other things, but
Yeah.
even with the benefit of daylight, the conditions on the water weren't much better than they had been during the night before. Rough swells and the constant wind meant that even though visibility was better, the 48 undamaged ships in the convoy still couldn't approach to offer any help. Locals from the island spent the whole day of February 8th in a canoe-based rescue operation, and by the time the sun went down again, most of the survivors from the wrecked ships had been brought to shore.
Also on the 8th, Lawford talked a fisherman into delivering a letter to the unwrecked ships, instructing them to go westward to Hogstye Bay on the lee side of the island, which is off of Georgetown. The water would be calm there, and they could all basically just wait at anchor for a new escort. 9 of the ships did this, and the rest of the convoy continued on unescorted.
On the 9th, Lawford set off from Gun Bluff on the east end of Grand Cayman, where they were camped, to Georgetown, planning to send word to the Admiralty and make arrangements for the convoy while he was there. This was basically the opposite end of the island. He arrived on the 11th and posted his various letters.
To sort of give you an idea of how small Grand Cayman is, he did this on foot.
In 2 days.
In 2
He
days.
walked the whole island.
Yeah. On the 12th, he was met in Georgetown with a petition signed by 8 residents of Grand Cayman who were asking for the passengers from the wrecked vessels to be, quote, immediately removed from this island as soon as possible. The huge influx of shipwreck survivors had the residents pretty much panicked. There were only about 900 people living on the island at this point, and shipwreck survivors had increased the island's population by more than half. So, at least 400 people now.
Feeling a little crowded.
Feeling a little crowded. On top of all that, in the words of the petitioners, it was, quote, morally impossible for the inhabitants to support themselves. This was because of a huge hurricane that had struck the islands the past October. So it was sort of like, we are in dire straits already, and you guys have just made our population half again as big. We cannot manage this.
In response to this petition, Lawford divvied the survivors up. He sent them to the ships at Hogstye Bay and wrote letters to their captains, repeating this, quote, morally impossible language. He begged the captains to remove their ships immediately, and he also wrote introductory letters to the governor of Havana requesting aid for any of the ships that should make their way there en route back to England.
Having handled all this correspondence and arrangements, Lawford then went back to the camp on Gun Bluff, and there he and about 20 of his men carried out a salvage operation for the next 6 weeks.
In the end, they were able to get quite a lot from the wreckage, including sails, rope, tools, ammunition and artillery, swords, pikes, and axes. Nearly everything perishable was lost, though, and many of the converts' original French cannons sank to the sea floor.
Only 5 men from the convert were killed in the wreck, along with 3 people on other ships, one of whom was the master of the Britannia. Several people died of illness in the wake of the disaster, though, but considering that there were 10 ships involved in this shipwreck, the death toll was remarkably small.
All 9 of the ships that had rendezvoused at Hogstye Bay and their newly increased crew and passengers made it safely back to England.
2 of the others that left previously unescorted, though, were a little less fortunate. One was taken by a French privateer, and another was captured by the French Navy.
And then there are consequences.
Of course.
Because this incident had been so huge and had involved a Navy vessel, it led to a court-martial on April 1st of 1794. The court-martial was held aboard the HMS Success, which was anchored off Port Royal, Jamaica.
Lawford's defense was that this entire thing would have been completely prevented if the ships in the convoy had stayed behind the convert like they were supposed to from the beginning. He insisted that had the convert been at the front of the convoy, it was nimble enough that it could have evaded the reef and steered the rest of the convoy away from it, even if they had gotten as close to the reef as they did before wrecking.
The first lieutenant, B. Bogue, and second lieutenant, William Earnshaw, were questioned as well, asked by the court to give their account of what had taken place. And each was cross-examined by Lawford, who asked about whether they had seen the master of the ship use the sextant to figure out their latitude, whether the signals had been flown to instruct the other ships to stay behind them, whether they'd had to fire shots to warn ships to get back behind them, and additional questions of a similar nature.
Yeah. The third lieutenant, I also kind of want to say lieutenant every time because we're talking about English people. The third lieutenant was also called and sworn, but he had not been on duty because of an injured arm, so he was excused.
Mr. Popplewell was questioned on the matter of the logbook, which had been found to contain no record of the distance traveled the day before the wreck. He was also questioned about his knowledge of the region and the route. Even though it hadn't been in the log, Popplewell was able to tell the court their latitude as of his last reckoning, and he insisted that the difference in their position was because of unexpectedly strong currents that had carried them off course during the night.
Then there was a lot of back and forth questioning on the matter of the logbook omission. And the master's mate and the midshipmen were called, and Lieutenant Bogue was called for a second time, and they were both cross-examined also by the captain. None of them knew the reason for the omission in the log, but they all had every reason to believe, according to their statements, that the measurements had been correct and that the sextant had been accurate.
Then Mr. Davy, master of the ship's Success, was called and asked by the court to give the latitude where the wreck had happened. Lawford cross-examined him, asking him how he found the currents leading north from Jamaica to the Caymans during his own voyages. And he said he'd found them to be very strong, and it had put them off their reckoning by 9 or 10 leagues.
I liked how Lawford's kind of like, you found this to be like extraordinarily strong current, did you not? We sure did. In the end, Lawford and his crew were acquitted, and here is the statement on that. Quote, "The court, having thoroughly examined into the several circumstances attending the same, and having maturely and deliberately considered the whole, is of the opinion that the misfortune was occasioned by a strong current setting the ships very considerably to the northward, and their reckoning, and doth therefore adjudge that the said Captain Lawford, commander of His Majesty's late ship the Convert, the officers and the company of the said ship be acquitted, and they are hereby acquitted accordingly."
And this incident didn't really affect Lawford's career. He continued to command ships, and he eventually became an admiral.
So, weather and science have dredged up lots of new information about this 220-year-old shipwreck. Shipwrecks, plural, of 10 ships in the last 40 or so years.
Coral-encrusted cannons started showing up around town on the east end of Grand Cayman in the 1970s, and the locals had lots of stories to tell about cannons in the water where they had played as children. These weapons all bore dates of 1781, as well as French markings.
An archaeological survey by the Institute of Nautical Archaeology in 1980 confirmed that there were 6 more large pieces of artillery still in the sand. The weapons themselves all seemed like they probably came from the Convert. It had kept its French artillery when it had been put into service for Britain. And a study of the reef line the same year also found evidence of where the Convert had run aground.
And still more in that same year, Hurricane Allen unearthed more wreckage in that same part of the ocean. There are more than 20 shipwrecks in the area, and surveys of all of them pinpointed 6 that are probably from the wreck of the 10 Sail. Ashore, archaeologists found all manner of pottery shards, glass, and naval hardware suspected to be from the survivors' camp. As you recall, they gathered up stuff and built a camp out of the salvaged wreckage.
And then they did their salvage work for about 6 weeks from there. Field work into all of this continued for about a decade. And then correspondence with naval scholars from France confirmed that the cannons that were there on the seafloor would have been aboard the Inconstant before it was pressed into English service.
Margaret Leshikar Denton, an archaeologist serving with the Cayman Islands National Museum, conducted a survey of cannons salvaged from shipwreck sites and followed it up with an extensive underwater survey of 30 shipwrecks along a 3-mile stretch of seafloor near the east end. She identified one site as the probable Convert and a collection of others that are probably some of the merchant ships. And she found some other previously unknown shipwreck sites from the 19th and 20th centuries in the process. So while looking for these, additional history was unearthed, as often happens.
And when we were saying that, the ocean around the Cayman Islands is full of shipwrecks, 30 shipwrecks along a 3-mile stretch.
Yeah.
That's a lot of shipwrecks.
It is.
That's one of the reasons why, if you go on vacation to the Cayman Islands, one of the things that will be advertised is like snorkeling and scuba diving in shipwrecks. Glass bottom boat rides to look at shipwrecks. There's a lot of
Shipwrecks are an industry.
Shipwreck tourism.
Yeah.
In addition to hiding your money from taxes. Okay. A couple of legends grew out of this shipwreck and have persisted until today. One is that in the years after the wreck of the 10 Sail, fashion completely changed on the island as locals retrieved bolts of identical cloth from the wreckage and then used them to make their own clothing.
I love that.
I thought you might.
Because it mentions textiles. The other legend is that there was a prince or another dignitary aboard one of the ships, and George III declared the islands to be free from taxes and conscription out of gratitude. And this is almost certainly a made-up story.
Yeah, it's much more likely that there were so few people in the Cayman Islands for so many years that
it wasn't worth taxing
They
them.
were not really making any kind of income for a long time. It probably kind of grew from there. Queen Elizabeth II visited the island and unveiled a commemorative park in 1994 for the 200th anniversary of the massive shipwreck. And that is the story.
A lot of ships.
So many ships.
Well, and it's one of those things where it's the wreck of 10 Sail, but there were so many other ships involved
Yeah.
because of this giant convoy that when you think about how many people were kind of there at the nexus point all at once while it was going down late in the night.
Yeah.
Ooh.
I got this book that was put out by the Cayman Islands National Archive and Cayman Free Press that collects reproductions of all these historical documents about the wreck. And you can hear Captain Lawford's exasperation when he's like writing out his descriptions of what happened, of like, if only these stupid merchant ships had just stayed behind me like they were supposed to, instead of me having to babysit them like a bunch of little children, none of this would have happened.
Well, I also have a question that's like, how did no one notice?
I have that question also, and that was not satisfactorily answered in any of the research that I did, of like how nobody...
I feel like Popplewell maybe should have taken some blame, because wasn't he on...
He was on deck.
command while that was happening?
Yeah.
What was he doing?
I maybe he was napping. But even so, there would have been other people on deck too. That is the weirdest part of this whole story, is like how at least 9 ships got ahead of them and wrecked without anyone noticing that anyone was ahead of them. I mean, it was a dark night, but that does seem a little...
Seems like a lot.
That seems like a lot of ships to pass you in the night without you noticing.
Yeah.
So anyway, wreck of the 10 Sail, thanks to my vacation.
Yay!
I also have some listener mail.
Ooh, I hope you will share it.
This is from Sarah, and Sarah says, Dear Tracy and Holly, I'm a big fan of the podcast and have been listening for years, but have never before written in. I love to listen as I walk the 20 minutes to the hospital each morning and back home each evening, as well as on runs with my dog, Watson. I felt compelled to write in after listening to your fabulous podcast on Elizabeth Blackwell. She's one of my favorite influential women of history, and as a female medical student, I greatly admire her for her work for gender equality in the medical profession. Her life story also resonates with me because I'm also a non-traditional medical student. I was an English major and went on to obtain my MPH before beginning medical school this fall at Rush. I'm also an ensign in the Navy and a recipient of an HPSP scholarship. Luckily for me, Rush Medical College, named after Benjamin Rush, who is featured in a Sawbones podcast, recruits many non-traditional students. At Rush, I am one of the student leaders of the AMWA, the American Women's Medical Association, so I wanted to take some time to remark upon some of your statements regarding the percentage of female physicians currently in practice. You were correct that about 35 to 36% of physicians are currently women. Notably, this percentage will gradually increase over time as my generation joins the workforce, because most medical schools now enroll an equal proportion of men and women. However, I also wanted to draw attention to the representation of women in certain specialties. You commented that you thought the percentage of women physicians was higher because you see female GPs regularly. This may be because the percentage actually is higher in primary care. Women are more represented in non-surgical specialties and primary care, as well as OBGYN. And then she has, in parentheses, 53% of women residents are in 4 specialties: internal medicine, pediatrics, family practice, and OBGYN. However, women remain underrepresented at higher levels of academic medicine and executive positions. And then she cited her source for this information, which makes me very much love Sarah.
Yes, indeed.
It's
I just love that she started an English major.
that too.
I'm like, I could not have gone from that to becoming a medical student.
I
But
could not become a medical student because I have problems with vomit. Her source was From Past to Present, the Changing Demographics of Women in Medicine from AAO.org. So, back to the letter proper. The subject of women and specialties is a heavily debated topic, as many people argue that these differences are a disparity, whereas others speak to differing gender roles and attributes that drive women to these fields and not others. I personally believe that women should be granted every opportunity to pursue the specialty of their choice without fear of discrimination because of their gender, and that all physicians should be granted the opportunity to have both meaningful home lives and pursue their career aspirations. I hope this email wasn't too long. No, it was not. And then she says, feel free to share if you think others will be interested, but keep up the good work. Oh, and then also pictures of a puppy.
yay!
Thank you, Sarah.
That's really cool.
It is really cool, and I think I knew the basics of the stat, that there are more women in primary care and more women OBGYNs, which of course are the two that I see most often. And now thinking on it, usually when I've had to see a specialist for some reason, like when I've had to go to the orthopedist, or you and I have both had to go to the sports podiatrist.
I was just there Friday.
And I had to go to an ophthalmologist once, and
Surgeons are often...
yeah, all of those doctors have been male, and most of my dentists have been male. But generally, I have chosen...
I think I've only seen one female dentist.
Yeah, I see lots of female hygienists. That's clearly a gender. There's definitely a balance of gender difference between hygienists and dentists, and also at the orthodontist's office between the orthodontist and whatever the technicians are. So yes, thank you so much for writing, Sarah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm sure there have been tons of studies done on how gender separation happens across medical fields.
Yeah. If you would like to write to us, you can. We are at historypodcast@discovery.com. We're also on Facebook at facebook.com/missedinhistory and on Twitter at missedinhistory. Our Tumblr is missedinhistory.tumblr.com. We are also on Pinterest at pinterest.com/missedinhistory. missedinhistory.com is the URL of our new-ish still website, where we are still tagging up all of our old episodes. It is a manual process. We're plugging away at it. If you would like to learn more about what .com is the leading provider of downloadable digital audiobooks and spoken word entertainment. Audible has more than 100,000 titles to choose from to be downloaded to your iPod or MP3 player. Go to audiblepodcast.com/history to get a free audiobook download of your choice when you sign up today.
Welcome to Stuff You Missed in History Class from HowStuffWorks.com.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Tracy V. Wilson.
And I'm Holly Fry.
We are picking up past host tradition today.
Yeah.
With our annual look at what has been unearthed in the world of history. Sometimes literally unearthed out of the dirt. Sometimes just stuff that's been found or discovered or whatever. As has been the case for the last couple of years, we have enough things to talk about that we have 2 parts to this episode to run today and 2 days from now.
It's been a big year. It seems like every other week at least there's some big new thing found, new thing discovered, new thing tested.
Yes. And so we're going to say, as we always do, this is not an exhaustive list of everything.
Yeah.
And if we get to the end of all this and there's something that you wish we had talked about, feel free to tell us nicely. We've gotten some furious people who are angry that we didn't mention a favorite thing before, and that makes our day a little sadder. But we do especially want to point out that we've already done whole episodes on some of this year's biggest finds.
Yeah.
2013 confirmed that remains previously found below a car park were those of Richard III. So we had a whole episode devoted to that back in March. We also, thanks to the world of forensic anthropology, got pretty clear confirmation that there was cannibalism going on during the starving time in Jamestown, and you can hear an episode about that from back in May. And just as a side note, that Richard III site is also where the team found a stone coffin that we discovered this year contained a lead coffin inside of it, which is another history mystery for another time.
Yeah.
This year we did also get some big news of something that was actually unearthed a while back, and most notably That's one of those is almost 1,500 pieces of artwork that had been confiscated by Nazis and were found in a Munich flat in 2011. That actually made headlines this November and included works by such amazing artists as Picasso and Matisse. So that was actually a previously unearthed thing that we just became aware of this year. So, like we said, not an exhaustive list. Today's episode, we're putting things kind of into groups because there are a lot of things to talk about.
Yeah.
Today's episode has some stuff that we just think is cool. We have a bunch of things that were found under car parks, and thanks to the Crossrail project in London. And then our next episode will be everything from amateur discoveries of stuff to everyone's favorite subject, exhumations.
Yeah.
So
starting with the not categorized but just super interesting and cool. In October, archaeologists in London announced the find of a limestone carving of an eagle that was found in a ditch. And it's a Roman eagle, although it was carved in Britain, and it's been called one of the best pieces of Romano-British art ever found. Its condition, in fact, was so good that when the team first saw it, they were afraid that they had accidentally disturbed a Victorian gravestone decoration.
yeah.
So a much later period item.
Yes, they thought it was something much newer than what it actually was when they first saw it because it was in such excellent condition.
The only damage that it has is one of its wings is broken, and it's being supported now by a frame. And it's being supported because it is doing a 6-month tour at the Museum of London. It was installed there just a month after being pulled out of the ground, and it is estimated to be about 2,000 years old.
Yeah.
So when you think about that, and people thought it was Victorian because it was so good, we're talking 150 years old versus
Yes.
its actual age of 2,000. So it's really in spectacular condition.
Yeah, and pretty remarkable that it within a month of being found, it was already in a museum. In the world of television history, Philip Morris, who is executive director at Television International Enterprise Archive, found 9 long-lost episodes of the TV show Doctor Who in a closet in a TV station in Nigeria.
That is so Doctor Who.
It is extremely Doctor Who. They actually found 11 episodes, but only 9 of them are among the missing 106 from the show's early years. If you're not familiar with this part of TV history, like now archiving things and keeping copies and having things to save for posterity is a pretty typical part of television production, but that was not really the case in the 50s and 60s. People didn't quite realize that we might want to have some of this stuff later. And so there are a lot of early episodes of the BBC TV show Doctor Who that we don't really have any known copies of. There was actually another article that circulated this year that claimed 100 episodes had been found, but that did not come from the most reputable source in the world, and I could not find actual confirmation that seemed legitimate to me. So we do know that 9 of them are no longer lost. Hooray.
And in Nigeria, of all
Yeah.
places. We already know where the Queen Anne's Revenge was, so that was Blackbeard's pirate ship, in case there's anybody that did not know that. It ran aground in the Beaufort Inlet in North Carolina in 1718, and that's well documented. And its location was confirmed back in 2011, but this year, the Underwater Archaeology Branch of the North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources announced that it intends to salvage the entire thing by 2014.
So that is sort of unearthing to come.
Yes, it's unearthing announcement, and next year we may have lots of beautiful pictures of things that they will be pulling up out of the water.
Yes, they really intend to bring every single piece of wood up from the ocean floor. Which is exciting.
I'm so excited to see how that project plays out.
And as a manager of things, I also go, that sounds expensive. And in our last sort of uncategorized, but just pretty cool, announced back in July, several pieces of Viking jewelry were found at a farm site in Denmark. And this was a little incongruous. This was a pretty modest site that they were working at. And these pieces were at least 1,300 years old. Some of them are made out of gold, and there was a lot of debate about how exactly these very expensive seeming gold pieces were found at a site that was otherwise so modest. And the number one theory at this point is that the Scyldings, who were the first Danish dynasty, had a royal seat about 6 miles away from this site. So while it wasn't a very rich settlement. It may have played host to more notable persons from not that far away, and that is how all these pieces wound up there.
So cool.
You may have heard this year that they found some things under parking lots.
Couple
What?
things. It was like parking lot history year.
Yes. And it's not totally surprising that so many things are being found under parking lots, but here are a few things that were found under parking lots and were not Richard III.
Yeah, that was the big, huge one, but there were several others. So in March, a crew that was demolishing an old parking lot found the tomb of a knight, as well as the foundations of a monastery built by King Alexander II of Scotland. The monastery was founded in 1230, but then destroyed during the Protestant Reformation, and the knight's grave was marked with a sandstone slab carved with a cavalry cross and sword, and a body believed to be the knight was actually found nearby.
Yeah. So it was several things unearthed in this one parking lot thing. I am looking for, at some point, it may have happened already, but I was not able to find it, confirmation that the body really was the knight and not another unrelated body.
Yeah, and whether we will ever identify the identity of the knight.
Yeah.
Hopefully, that could be next year's Unearthed.
In May, archaeologists found a 1700-year-old cemetery under a car park in Leicester, England. And that seemed to be, interestingly, the final resting place for people of many faiths. They were buried in different positions with different funerary rituals. There were about 13 people buried there, and they date back about to the year 300. It seems...
That is very fascinating.
It is fascinating. So it sort of makes it clear that there were people of many faiths living there at the same time, and that it was socially acceptable for them all to be buried
in the
together,
same place.
Or maybe just necessary for some reason.
Yeah. Announced in October, in Scotland, an 11th century Viking parliamentary site, a site for gathering known as the Thing, which was for making laws, settling disputes, and those sorts of things. Again, under a parking lot.
Yep, and I am just delighted by the fact that this was called the Thing. It probably comes from Thingvillier, which means the field of the assembly. So this was...
I like to picture the horror thing, because that makes it funnier.
It does. The reason that this was notable was that there had not been one of these sites found in that part of Scotland before this point.
Yeah, it kind of expanded the territory that we thought they were having these sorts of activities in.
Yes.
Cool.
Parking lots are not the only things that are hiding many archaeological finds this year. There's also Crossrail, which is this high-frequency, high-capacity rail line that's in the works for London and the surrounding area. And work on the Crossrail project has unearthed all kinds of stuff. It started back in 2009 and has unearthed since then at least 10,000 archaeological items.
It's a lot.
It is a lot of stuff.
So in March, they unearthed a death pit of probable Black Death victims, and that was dug up under Charterhouse Square. And at the time it was dug, the pit would have been just outside the walls of London.
In August, the project dug up a 16th century gold coin and a huge amount of Mesolithic flint. They called this kind of a Mesolithic tool factory. All of these would have been pieces of 9,000-year-old tools.
And in October, it was a collection of 20 Roman skulls and pieces of pottery. And people were bandying about the idea that these could be remains from Boudicca's rebellion, which we've talked about in the podcast. But the pattern of clustering in where they were found suggests that they were really just washed downstream from a Roman burial ground.
Yeah.
That they weren't so much Boudica related as just displaced.
Yeah, they kept finding skulls bunched together where the river had a bend in it,
Yeah.
as though they had just washed downstream and then caught there from the current. And this last one is not actually related to the Crossrail. It's a completely different subway excavation, and that's taking place in Rio. This subway expansion in Rio has unearthed at least 200,000 artifacts, a lot of them really impressively intact. And one of these unearthed this year is a toothbrush believed to have belonged to Emperor Pedro II, who ruled Brazil from 1831 to 1889. The bristles of the toothbrush are no longer intact, but the toothbrush itself is still there.
So cool.
And before we move on, let's take a minute and talk about our sponsor.
That sounds grand.
It is Netflix today.
I have some Netflix love.
I really do too. I spend a lot of time in Netflix land.
Me too.
With more than 26 million subscribers, Netflix is the world's leading internet subscription service for enjoying movies and TV programs. Members can instantly watch thousands of titles on a vast array of devices, streaming TV shows and movies, and that can go to Microsoft's Xbox 360, Sony's PS3 game console, and the Nintendo Wii console, plus Apple devices, Kindle and Nook. As a Netflix member, you can instantly watch as many movies as you want, anytime you want, for one low monthly price. There are no late fees or due dates. As a new member and a listener of Stuff You Missed in History Class, you can get a free 30-day trial membership. Go to netflix.com/history and sign up. And be sure to use that URL so they know that we sent you. That is netflix.com/history. So let's get back to what's been uncovered this year. We have several things that are bits of communication that have been revealed often in other texts. Conservators at the National Portrait Gallery in London found this little piece of art in a portrait of Sir Walter Raleigh that, quote, reveals the depth of the explorer's devotion to Queen Elizabeth I. It's this little coded reference to the moon and water within the context of this portrait. And the message there is that Sir Walter Raleigh is willing to have the Queen control him the way the moon controls the tides. This patch of moon and sea is up in the upper left of the painting, and it was revealed, not known to have been there before, during an extensive restoration project that is restoring the whole portrait.
European scientists used advanced multispectral imaging to reveal previously washed away writing in medieval manuscripts this year. I think this is so incredibly cool. One of these is a manuscript that's housed in Jerusalem. Today, its pages are books of the Greek Old Testament, but underneath are passages from Euripides and Aristotle, as well as other works. And they've used this same process on a manuscript from Paris, which is a 5th century commentary on Aristotle.
Yeah.
So it's kind of multiple documents in one.
Yeah, well, when you look back into history to time periods when paper was really expensive and needed to be washed away and reused, the fact that now we can kind of go back and piece together what was originally on those pieces of paper is pretty cool.
It's really cool.
It also reminds me of when literary scholars will look at like the strikeouts and erasures and things and people's original drafts of their work.
Yeah.
Except this has a lot more science. Also, this year at the SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory, scientists use X-rays to reconstruct a 1797 aria from an opera by Luigi Cherubini, which the composer had, in kind of a fit of fury, blacked out completely with carbon. The trick to doing this, because the paper itself was invisible to the X-rays, but not the notes that he wrote on the paper, they had to figure out which notes belonged on which side of the page. So in addition to using X-rays to get a picture of what all the notes were, they then turned to analyzing his handwriting and weeding out the notes on each side of the page based on which way the lines on the notes slanted.
So cool. Has anybody heard it?
Yes, you can now hear it.
And it's beautiful, and we don't know why he wanted to destroy it.
I think he was angry and temperamental, as many creative people are. I say this as a creative person who is sometimes deleting all of my own work in a bit of anxiety.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't either.
I never destroy anything. I destroy all the things. Not so much reconstructed, but it is writing related. In June, federal officials and representatives from the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington announced that they had found the Rosenberg Diary, which was written by Alfred Rosenberg, who was a friend and confidant of Adolf Hitler and a notorious member of the Nazi Party. And he would have had firsthand knowledge of a lot of what Hitler was orchestrating. So this document may very well uncover new information about this period of history. And in the words of U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum Director Sarah J. Bloomfield, quote, As we build the collection of record on the Holocaust, having material that documents the actions of both perpetrators and victims is crucial to helping scholars understand how and why the Holocaust happened. So cool.
That is, I think, the most horrifying thing discovered in all our discoveries this
but
year.
Really important.
Extremely
and really,
important.
It's kind of one of those things where the bad guys, there's always a cloak of like mystery around them. Not even specifically these, but any. It's like there's never enough documentation of like, but why were you doing this?
Yeah. Well, and especially as the specter of Holocaust denial kind of rises up, having primary sources of what was really happening is increasingly important to dispel that as false. And also, I think as we get farther and farther removed from that time of history, it becomes more and more difficult for people who did not live through it to conceive of that ever having happened in the first place.
Yeah.
And so having things like the Rosenberg Diary can help put that into better context for people.
And now we move on from that very tragic topic.
Yes, we did
to
not
our
want.
favorite thing.
We didn't want to end on the most tragic topic with this particular episode. We've got a few things that were unearthed this year that have to do with food.
Hooray!
In August, a team of researchers led by University of York archaeologist Haley Saul published a paper in PLOS 1 that looked at food deposits left in prehistoric pottery from what is now Denmark and Germany. So in all this charred residue from inside these pottery fragments, and sometimes on the outside too, they found residues that are consistent with the modern garlic mustard seed. So the garlic mustard seed does not have a lot of nutritional value. It is not filling. It is not like full
You
of
won't get
vitamins and
protein.
minerals. No. But what it does have is a lot of flavor. And this is the first direct evidence that prehistoric Europeans used spice to make their food taste better.
Yum.
I'm
It's
excited.
really not a surprise. Everyone loves deliciousness, right?
Well, we also have some evidence of animals who do things to their food to make it taste better. So it's not super surprising that early, back in history, people did the same thing.
Yeah.
But still really cool to have evidence of that.
Also, that same month, in August, the University of Leicester announced that it had unearthed the recipe for the first chilled chocolate treats in Britain. These recipes were gathered by the Earl of Sandwich, not the inventor of the sandwich. That was his great-great-grandson, in 1668. And this was a concoction of chocolate and snow. Similar to our ice cream podcast, we talked about things that started with snow and then were made into frozen delicious treats.
Yes. We should also probably call his great-great-grandson the purported inventor of the sandwich.
Yeah, we had to be careful with that one.
Yeah.
It's also a restaurant. The Earl of Sandwich. Not related to either of those people, except in the borrowing of a name.
Yes. Also in October, researchers at the University of Buckingham announced that they'd found charred bones of frog legs at a dig not far from Stonehenge. These bones were from somewhere between 6250 BCE and 7596 BCE, and this makes them the oldest evidence of frog legs used as food anywhere in the world. And it predates the first evidence of eating frogs' legs in France, where supposedly the practice originated. Also at the site were bones of fish, boar, deer, and other animals that would have lived in the area at the time. I am fond of frogs' legs.
I am too. I have a love-hate.
Yeah.
As with it, I'm kind of a carnivore by nature, but as you know, I'm also crazy animal lady, so I'm perpetually riding this wave of what I'm comfortable with, and then I eat meat anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I do love frogs' legs. There's some French in my family background, and we grew up eating them.
Yes.
They're really good.
Yes, I don't know if I've told you the story of one of the periods of my life when I was a vegetarian, and it ended when I was at a work function at which quail and frog